Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Star Wars Expanded Universe, now made by Disney or current Lucasfilm, whichever way we slice it. Legends. Now, I of course prefer the term Expanded Universe, but for mass appeal, for people to understand, it's now redubbed Legends. Today we have something you should definitely read in October, even though it is June for me, which is DeathTroopers by Joe Schreiber. For those of you who have been following my reviews, Joe Schreiber has done a couple other things in the Star Wars Expanding Universe. He did the, in my opinion, not so good book, Red Harvest, which took place like 4,000 years prior to this book. That also had to do with zombies. It was kind of a different thing and how that happened. It was more like Sith alchemy or something. So it was different, but it was still about zombies. And while that one didn't really work for me, it's weird because this book also focuses on like the bad side because it's like the Empire side. Um, but because the Empire is more like normal people within an army, because there are some bad people, there are some good people just doing their jobs, working for this government. Whereas Red Harvest is like a Sith academy. Like I know they're like teenagers, young adults, but they're still Sith. So I just don't care what happens to them as much. That being said, Red Harvest had quite a bit of humor. The other one that Joe Schreiber did was the excellent book called Mall Lockdown, which was a very bloody book and centered around Maul in this prison. I think it's actually the same prison, though. No, it's a different prison, but it's another prison like setting. This book takes place before Episode 4. There is an Imperial prison barge called the Purge, and it's got stormtroopers and criminals of varying degrees. Criminals who deserve to be in prison, like murderers and other things, the R word, but then there's other people too that, just like stole something, like still crime, still wrong, but, a vastly different quantity of sin as compared to, murdering someone. So you got all these groups of people in there, but their ship breaks down in the unknown regions, and they find a derelict Star Destroyer that's just empty. They go to salvage it so that they can fix their ship, and that's when they get involved with the zombies in space, which is essentially what this book is. And this book is just brimming with atmosphere. It is incredible. If you are a horror fan, this is a must read. Even for Star Wars, I mean, it is very bloody, very mature, very dark. I do not recommend you read this to your kids. Like, if you're like, oh, I'm going to go through the Star Wars Expanded Universe or just Star Wars books in general, and I'm going to read a couple chapters a night to my kid, and you're going to do that, don't do it with this book. Just don't. Just be like, when they're a teenager in high school to a young adult, be like, hey, you should read this. It's good. But don't have elementary schoolers and maybe even middle schoolers read this, though maybe you'll feel they're accepting of it at that point. But it's dark. And I really enjoyed it. I mean, the atmosphere and the tension for the first 100 pages is just it's glorious. I like the character writing. We get introduced to a lot of new characters, and you care about a lot of them. You hate some of them. Some of them you are meant to hate. The Doctor Lady is probably the most morally righteous, even despite the cameo that I'll talk about in spoilers. But the Doctor Lady is probably the best character in this book, at least morally. We also got these two brothers who are criminals who, they're not like big bad people, but they're main characters. And we follow this just awful penis hole of a person that was a part of the Empire. But to credit where credit's due, this book even gives him more nuance. So that was really cool to see as well, because he's not a one-dimensional evil villain. In fact, he even kind of has a turnaround by the end. Not that it excuses everything that he's done, but as Star Wars always is, even in a dark, atmospheric horror novel about zombies, the story of redemption rings true even here. But yeah, I found this book to be a lot of fun. It's very dark. It's very spooky. I wouldn't say scary necessarily, but I've played a lot of horror games. I've watched a lot of horror movies, so horror doesn't really affect me. If you are more sensitive to it, you might actually get quite spooked from this, especially if you listen to the audiobook, which I didn't, but I imagine that's probably pretty spooky. There is a cameo in this book that kind of pops in. It's more of a cameo, it's more of a side character, because these two people appear about 100 pages into the book and they remain for the rest of the book. Um, and it ruins some of the tension, but I'll get into that in spoilers. But yeah, I thought this was a lot of fun. There's Star Wars isn't known for being scary, but they do have quite a few scary things that are more obscure. Like, you have to be an EU fan to really know about it. DeathTroopers is probably one of the more popular, notable ones that people know about going into the EU, which is that this book is about zombies in space. There's also the Yusong Vaughn themselves, which are, a little bit more well known, but they themselves are pretty creepy too. But since we get to know so much about them during the series, they're more scary when you first read NGO for the first time because you know the least about them. But the more you learn, as with all things, the less scary they become, because the greatest fear is fear of the unknown. Um, and all we learn about this virus is that it's a secret government project, because the Empire loves to do that. It kind of reminded me of the Umbrella Corporation in Resident Evil. That's kind of like what the Empire was being with this. But I mean, it made sense. So that's why it's not like, oh, this is too goofy for Star Wars, because I was like, it actually fits, because I could totally see the Empire doing something like what they were doing. So that makes sense. Um, but definitely an interesting read. Definitely something you would not expect from a Star Wars novel, right? But yet at the same time, it's really good for it, because it it does stuff you would think Star Wars would never touch, and so I really appreciated that. But yeah, I think it's worth your time. There's also, I should mention, it was on the Star Wars website back in the day. It is no longer, but you can still find it. You can find excerpts of it online if you look hard enough, and it's just like audio recordings of people from the prison before the events of the book. And those are pretty alright. They're not necessarily in the slightest for reading the actual book, but they're extra stuff if you want it. But yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. I'm going to leave it here without spoilers. If you don't want spoilers, time to go. If you don't care about spoilers, go ahead and stay. But that is your warning. I'm getting to it. So, the cameos. Han and Chewie show up in this book. And the instant they show up is the instant that the tension kind of drops. At least whenever they're on screen, because this is before episode 4. And we already know how Chewie dies. And so it's an absolute certainty that they're making it out. So the fact that they're there kind of ruins some of the tension, at least when it comes to scenes revolving around them. Of course, we have all these new characters which we can still feel and fear for. So that isn't necessarily ruined. I just felt like you could have done this entire story without Han and Chewie. Like, they didn't need to be here. That being said, this story also helps with the small comment that Han makes in episode 4, when he's like, I don't believe in the Force, I don't believe in that mystical garbage. I've seen some wacky stuff in my time, but that's too far. Or, I'm paraphrasing, but it was something like that. Being in a zombie outbreak and having to escape that, I mean, that's a wild adventure to go on. That's pretty out there, but it is scientifically explained. There's nothing mystical really about it. So he can be like, yeah, I've seen some weird stuff in my time, but the Force is like mystical mumbo jumbo, and I'm an atheist. I am buying that bull crap. But, I have seen some strange things like zombies and stuff, but those are all explainable, So I appreciate it for that aspect. It's just, like I said, the tension can really be like literally in the first couple scenes of having Han and Chewie in the story. Chewie gets like infected, or like possibly gets infected, but we know he can because he's in episode 4. But like it's written really well. Like you're engaged, you're terrified by the way Chewie's thinking, like what it's making him think like. But you know that Chewie's gonna be fine because he has to be in episode 4. But like it talks about like he saw his father, he saw his wife, he saw his son, and he just thought about eating them and eating everyone he was in contact with, and them encouraging him to do so. That's creepy. That's written well. But I know Chewie's gonna be fine, so all that tension kind of just like evaporates. That's probably my biggest criticism of this book is just Han and Chewie being here. Not that I hate their inclusion. I enjoyed them. They're Han and Chewie. And they do some really nice stuff with them too. I just felt like it was unnecessary to include them. Like you could have done this whole story and not had them in it, and I think it probably would have been better for it, in my opinion. That being said, there was one scene near the end of the book where Chewie picks up a little Wookiee, like a little boy, and he's just like whimpering and coughing, and Chewie just is silent. But Han in the corner of the room sees just pools of blood, and 3 Wookiees just chowing down on meat. Probably like a father, mother, and like some uncle, or I don't know, just 3 Wookiees, and he shoot them all down. While that's happening, he backs up, and then but Chewie's holding the little boy who becomes a zombie, and the little boy's grabbing his neck, trying to get a bite on him. And at this point, Chewie is just frozen. He will not do anything. He's just sitting there, and it's at an angle where like Han can't really do anything, and he's like, "What the frick is Chewie doing? What the frick, dude? I'm about to get bitten. You gotta take this thing out." And then finally, Chewie blasts like the little kid's face open. Like this is so dark. Like this don't read this to your kids. And Chewie's just silent after that. I mean, he'll get back to being okay. I mean, he'll never be 100% after that. Oh my god. But like he'll go back to being how we see him in episode 4 and stuff. Like he can move past it. But in that moment, he just like, I had to save you. Life debt. I just killed a kid. And it's all demonstrated without a single bit of dialogue, or at least on Chewie's part, or here, Chewie never talks, but he'd be like, "Well, pal, I didn't mean to do that," or "What are you crying about?" Whatever Han says to kind of insinuate whatever Chewie was saying in his native tongue. But he didn't say anything. He was just quiet, and that spoke volumes as to how he was feeling. And that was just an expert scene. Another expert scene, also more near the end of the book, cannibalism. This is where we kind of get the origin story as to how this all happened, with a bunch of malnourished, really hungry, starving Imperials. That the main bad guy, or not bad guy, anti-hero, I don't know what to call him, Santoris, or whatever fudge his name is, meets them, and they're telling him the origin story. But by the end of it, they start talking about, like, we haven't had food, so we've had to make decisions about how to keep going. And he said there were 7 of us, including myself. And it wasn't until the 4 remaining grabbed him that he realized that there weren't 7 in that place that he was hiding in, because they had started to eat the other people to stay alive while they're hiding from the zombies. And again, that's so mature, so dark, but then also like that revelation of how they're still around and kicking after 10 weeks with no food starts to make sense. So, and also becoming the very thing they swore to destroy. So I thought that was really cool. The project, this whole zombie project, was called Blackwing. It was a top secret project by the Empire. I think to be used against the rebels. I don't think it's very clear on what the purpose of it was. It was just meant to be used in military engagements. Like, even if you shoot down our men, they can come back and swing at you again as a zombie. I think it was kind of like the implication. Personally, I've never really understood factions, whether it be the Umbrella Corporation in Resident Evil, Star Wars, pick your poison. I've always thought it's really, and this is more of a me thing. I don't know if I don't think it's really a problem with the story. I hate the idea that the government would be so stupid as to use a viral infection to try to control means of population or resistance with a war or something, because biological warfare could be spit back in your face so easily unless you are absolutely 110% certain that you have full control over all variables. Because if you have even the slightest bit of like doubt, then I think it's not worth it. I mean, I don't know if biological warfare is really worth it in general ever, but that is a thing. It's like if you don't have absolute certainty and that can backfire and hit the rest of the population, then why would you even indulge in something like that, you know? But that's just me. That was pretty much it. I didn't have too many notes. This book, I read this book in one day though, so I was thoroughly engaged with it. It was really a fun and spooky time. But yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. Probably, I think out of all of Joe Schreiber's work, I think I like this one the most. I think it's this one, um, Lockdown, and of course, at the very bottom is Red Harvest. But I had a lot of fun with this one. It read quick. It felt horrific. It was horrific. Um, and it was just something different that you don't usually get from Star Wars. And for that, I really appreciate it. Until next time, guys, may the Force be with you.